If you think you know the truth about celebrity families, stay exactly where you are, because what you are about to hear will challenge every assumption you have ever made. Before we begin, make sure you leave a comment predicting what you think the real story behind this family is, because by the end of this video, you will want to compare your first impression with the truth that slowly, piece by piece, forces itself into the light. And do not skip ahead. You will miss the connective tissue, the hidden patterns, the reason this story has held the world in suspense for nearly 2 decades. Listen closely, because nothing in this saga is accidental. Everything is a clue. Everything is a warning. And everything leads to a moment that no one in Hollywood ever imagined would happen. This is a story about a young girl born into the brightest spotlight on Earth, a mother who understood danger long before anyone else dared to say it aloud, and a father whose global fame could not prevent the slow, painful unraveling of his own family. But before we dive into the heart of this mystery, take a second to subscribe, drop your guess in the comments, and tell the algorithm that you want more stories like this. Your prediction matters, because the truth is multi-layered, and if you are paying attention, you will see how the earliest cracks were visible from the very beginning. Now, let's begin where the world first met her, long before anyone realized how heavy her name would become. Imagine entering the world not in silence, but into a silence demanded by belief. A silence enforced. A silence surrounded by rules, expectations, and spiritual weight. A silence designed to welcome a newborn without a single spoken word. That is how Suri began her life. Not with a cry greeted by celebration, but with a quietness that would follow her for years. She was not just born into fame. She was born into a narrative already scripted for her. A narrative crafted by adults who believed they were shaping destiny. Her name was recognized before she took her first breath. Millions knew it. Millions repeated it. And millions assumed her life would be a dream. But reality has never cared about fantasy. Behind the polished magazine covers and choreographed smiles, a very different childhood was forming. Suri's earliest days were defined by secrecy, ritual, and strict beliefs. Her world was determined by rules few outsiders understood, and fewer still could question. It was a world where silence meant obedience, where privacy meant control, and where a newborn child belonged not just to her parents, but to a belief system woven through every decision made around her. Even then, people close to the family whispered that the quiet surrounding her birth foreshadowed a much louder storm ahead. As she grew, that storm crept closer. Her parents, once one of the most celebrated couples on Earth, were living inside a beautiful illusion. To the public, they were glamorous, glowing, perfect. But behind closed doors, the atmosphere thickened with tension that no camera could capture. In those early years, the marriage looked like a fairy tale written by a studio executive with an unlimited budget. But every fairy tale has shadows, and this one had more than most. The truth is that the cracks appeared almost immediately. They were invisible to fans, but unmistakable to those who paid attention to the details. And as Suri learned to walk, talk, and explore the world around her, her mother began to notice things she could no longer ignore. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious, just patterns, just small shifts in tone, in behavior, in freedom. Little signs that their family life was not as open or as joyful as it was made to appear. Over time, those little signs multiplied. Friends noticed that Katie rarely went anywhere alone. She was always accompanied, always observed, always within reach of people whose loyalty belonged not to her, and not to her daughter, but to something much larger. There were watchful eyes everywhere, smiles that never fully reached the eyes, conversations that felt rehearsed, outings that seemed controlled. It was subtle at first, then unmistakable. And slowly, the bright, hopeful young actress who had once spoken publicly of her dreams and ambitions began to dim. Her spark faded, her voice softened, her laughter became rarer. She was smiling because she was expected to smile. But behind that smile was a mother who understood one thing with growing certainty. The environment surrounding her daughter was no longer safe. The public did not know this. They only saw the surface. They saw glamorous events, expensive vacations, perfectly coordinated photo calls. But behind every image was a woman learning how much she did not control. And what she feared most was what those same forces could eventually mean for her daughter. Suri was getting older. She was reaching an age where independence was supposed to begin, but independence is impossible in a world built on surveillance. And Katie knew it. She felt it long before she spoke it aloud, long before anything appeared in newspapers or tabloids. She understood that if she waited too long, her daughter's future would no longer be in her hands. So she started planning. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, carefully, strategically. She reconnected with friends she trusted. She began establishing distance between her life and the structures controlling it. She did not act impulsively. She acted like someone who knew she was being watched. Every text message, every phone call, every outing. She replaced staff. She changed numbers. She consulted lawyers. She built a plan like a person preparing to flee a fortress with a child whose entire existence was monitored. And still, the outside world had no idea. Then came late June of the year 2012, the moment when the illusion shattered. Katie filed for divorce, a move so sudden that it stunned Hollywood and blindsided the man she had once married. But this was not a typical celebrity separation. This was not a disagreement about lifestyle or career. This was a tactical extraction, a mother securing the safety and autonomy of her child, a woman choosing protection over image, strategy over fear, survival over compliance. The filing alone sent shockwaves, but what happened next revealed the depth of her planning. Within days, she and Suri disappeared. No cameras caught their departure. No bodyguards trailed behind. No luxury cars or security convoys alerted the press. Just two figures slipping out of Los Angeles and into New York City, retreating into anonymity as quickly and quietly as the silence that marked Suri's birth. Their sudden absence became louder than any tabloid headline. Hollywood had never seen anything like it. One of the world's most famous children had vanished from public life, protected not by wealth or fame, but by the determination of a mother who refused to surrender her daughter's future to an environment she no longer trusted. And while the world speculated, debated, and theorized, a new reality began to take shape. A reality where the father who once lifted his daughter proudly before flashing cameras was no longer present. Not in daily life, not in casual visits, not in public moments. Silence replaced connection. Distance replaced presence. Time replaced memory. The gap between father and daughter widened year after year, until it became a canyon so deep that no one could see the bottom. And still, the world kept waiting for a reunion that never came. But while the silence grew, Suri grew too. Her mother rebuilt a steady, grounded life for her. No red carpets, no press, no celebrity-fueled chaos, just normal routines, school days, friends, hobbies, a childhood reclaimed piece by piece. But the most important transformation was still to come, and when it arrived, it sent a message louder than any interview she never gave. She let go of the name that had defined her since birth. She dropped the surname the world had attached to her identity. She chose a new name, a name that belonged only to her, a name that symbolized independence, a name that separated her from a legacy she no longer wanted to carry. But what she did next would be even more revealing. And if you think you can predict it, leave your guess in the comments right now before we continue. Because the next step she took stunned everyone who had ever followed her story. If you have made it this far, stay with me. Because what comes next is where the entire narrative shifts. And before we continue, take a moment to leave a comment explaining what you think this transformation truly meant for her. Was it rebellion, liberation, self-protection, or something far more complex? Your interpretation matters, because the deeper we go, the more each detail reveals the truth hiding beneath the surface. Now let us return to the moment she stepped out from behind her old identity and into a new one. When she chose her new name, she was not making a small symbolic gesture. She was not making a statement for the press or the tabloids. She was drawing a line between the life she was handed and the life she intended to build for herself. She was declaring independence in a world that once tried to decide her future before she could even walk. For someone raised under strict control, monitored movements, limited freedom, and the weight of global fame, This was not just a personal decision. It was a reclaiming of the narrative that had been imposed on her since birth. And while the public whispered, debated, and speculated about what her choice meant for her relationship with her father, the truth was written more clearly in her actions than in any statement she could ever make. She was moving forward. She was reshaping herself piece by piece. She was beginning a life unburdened by the myth of who people thought she was supposed to be. And it did not end with a name. Her next steps were even more deliberate. She sought a quieter path. Not the bright glare of Hollywood. Not the generational fame she could have capitalized on with a single interview, a single red carpet, a single public appearance. Instead, she chose a world where she could blend in, study, grow, and decide what kind of woman she wanted to become without cameras dictating her every move. Fashion school became her sanctuary, a place where creativity mattered more than headlines, where she was not a celebrity's daughter but a student learning, experimenting, and creating. For the first time in her life, she lived without the expectations of a global audience. She walked through campus like any other student, carrying books instead of fame, dreams instead of obligations. But while she was building a new future, the distance between her and her father hardened into something more permanent. Year after year, no photograph surfaced, no casual sightings, no holidays spent together, no clues suggesting a reunion. It was as if the two worlds had drifted so far apart that no bridge could span the distance. Meanwhile, her father continued to rise professionally, performing dangerous stunts, headlining colossal films, and expanding his global influence. But behind those achievements was a silence that grew louder with each passing year, a silence that the public could not ignore, a silence that made many wonder whether the divide was chosen, imposed, or simply too painful to repair. Still, her mother refused to feed bitterness. She focused entirely on building stability, safety, and independence for her daughter. And in doing so, she created a foundation strong enough to withstand the noise of public speculation. She turned her home into a haven. She taught her daughter self-reliance, emotional strength, and the importance of defining one's own identity. Those qualities became visible every time the young woman stepped into the world. Confident, thoughtful, self-possessed, and above all private. But even a private life cannot completely shield someone from the emotional weight of such a legendary separation. And during her late teenage years, there were moments where that weight became visible, even if only for a brief second. A photograph captured her sitting alone, deep in thought, exhaustion written across her expression. A moment later her mother appeared, walking toward her with quiet urgency. They sat together. They spoke softly. Their bond, forged through years of survival, whispered louder than any headline. It was a reminder that even in lives shaped by fame and distance, the core remains human. A mother and a daughter navigating a world that once threatened to consume them. By the time she turned 19, she stood fully on her own path, studying fashion, writing music, cultivating a future without relying on the legacy of her last name. And each step carried the same message. She was no longer defined by the man the world associated with her. She was no longer shaped by belief systems she never chose. She was no longer a silent participant in a narrative she did not write. She was creating a new story, one built on intention instead of expectation, one built on freedom instead of control, one built on possibility instead of limitation. But while her future expanded, a question lingered in the collective consciousness. Will she ever reconnect with her father? Could time soften the past? Could silence give way to understanding? Could two people separated by belief, circumstance, and years of absence find their way back to one another? No one knows the answer, and perhaps that is the point. This story is not about closure. It is about evolution. It is about claiming a self. It is about a young woman stepping out of the shadow of fame and into the light of her own making. And it is about a mother who risked everything to give her daughter the chance to choose her own path. Now the choice belongs to the daughter alone. And as she continues shaping her future, the world can only watch and wonder whether the silence between them is temporary or eternal. Before you go, take a moment to comment your thoughts. Do you believe the divide can ever be healed? Do you think her father will one day reach out in a meaningful way? Or has the distance grown too vast to bridge? And if you want to keep the conversation alive, share this story, leave your theories, and help build the anticipation for what comes next. Because this saga is far from over, and the final chapter has not yet been written.